Thank you very much for allowing me to record this. So I always, I don't always, but I almost always wet the back of my paper. And I'm gonna wet the back of the paper. The front is, this is the back. The paper is upside down. And I'm gonna wet the board itself. And it's soggy, it's wet, very wet, right? Folks often don't understand just how wet it should be. And I slap this down and water tension is going to hold this in place. And what I'm going to do is use my trusty spritzer bottle and very gently dust the top surface of it with a little bit of water. And what I'm doing is I am a little, the paper is thin, but it's made of cotton, it's absorbent. So it is like a very, very thin sponge. And I'm filling up that sponge, right? So when I go to paint, this will help it not dry out, right? It'll stay wet longer. And it'll let me have a little bit of freedom in terms of how I apply paint. I don't have to worry about little blossoms and mistakes as much because it's gonna, the water will stay wet. When I put down a new, I'm tightening up something here as I begin. When I put down a new brush stroke with water on my brush and paint on my brush, it'll meet the water inside the paper and it'll sort of bond to the water inside the paper, and it has this reservoir of water to pull from so that it doesn't dry out. Okay, I want to show you guys the photo that I'm going to be working from, and so that you guys can get a sense of just what we're doing. So I'm going to share my screen for just a moment. This photo is what I will be working from. And I just want to show you, this is the whole photo. And I wanted to make sure that I had something interesting for a square, and something needed to be dominant and something needed to be secondary. So in this version, I've decided to make the ground plane dominant, right? And the sky goes up, and I only have a little bit of the sky viewable. So this is what I'll be looking at as I'm painting. And just wanted to give you guys a sense of where we're going with that. Does anybody have any sort of simple or quick questions they'd like to ask me before I get rolling?
I have a question.
Sure.
So if you use a hair dryer on that surface, does then the paper become unstuck from the board?
That's a good question. The short answer is if I dry it enough, it does. But the long answer is it doesn't. So you'll see when we're drying, pardon me, giving my wife a kiss goodbye. You'll see as I'm painting how it looks and what it does. I can dry the surface, put a second wash on, and it won't be all blobbly and loose and dissolving into itself. And so I am allowed to do multiple layers, and I'll use a blow dryer in between. And underneath, it'll still have moisture that's been kept between the cuticle of the gator board that I'm using and the paper itself. So if I blow dry it enough, the corners will curl up. So that does occur. But I just don't blow dry it that much. Or if I do, I move on and just work past it. That's a good question.
Do you ever re-wet the back of the paper in the middle of a painting?
Yes is the short answer, but it's dangerous. um, if I re-wet it in the middle of the painting, what'll happen is it's fine. You can do it. I have done it. It's all about equilibrium of water on the edges of your paper and the water in the middle of your paper. So if I decide to wet the back again, oftentimes that equilibrium is broken and it'll want to creep up around the edges of the paper, right? And I'll actually get water that's coming into the body of the paper, and I'll get little cauliflowers on the edge. And that in general, that is a problem with this technique. It's one of the little compromises you make. You'll see me drying off the edges of the paper. I'll be removing some of the pigment from the corners and the edges of the paper when I do it. It's just not perfect. It's one of the little things that you give up for all the things that it offers. All right, let's get cracking, do our little thing for today. One of the things I'm going to be experimenting with is I'm using different kinds of pigments. So, when you're painting 75 or 100 paintings, days of paintings in a row, you start thinking, well, what would I like to do, right? So for today, I'm going to be using a kind of phthalo blue. And I am going to knock it back a bit. And I'm going to use super smooth pigments for this first wash. You'll see what it looks like in a second. And then, so it'll no granulation at all. And then I'm using Primatech super granulating pigments for the second wash. So we're going to play with that comparison. And as it reaches where the hills are going to go, I'm going to feather it out. And now I'm going to drop in a new batch of color, and it'll be also super smooth pigment, right? So nothing granulating. It's all going to be just kind of a pristine, smooth wash as it goes down. These are going to be the highlights, right? Later in the painting. These will be the sunny hills that I was showing you in the photo, and the little streaks of sunshine, because actually it's right, it's kind of like dusk, and a lot of this is, there we go. And I'm going to have some small speckles here. So this first phase is nice. You don't have to really worry too much about what you're doing. It definitely, here on the video, it looks very zingy. It is not very zingy. It's definitely more mild than that. But if you want to do zingy stuff, this is when you do it, right? Because everything I do after this, it's going to get darker and more muted as I layer the colors. So these are where not only I capture my lights, I'm washing off my brush from the last painting I did. Not only does it capture the lights in the next phase, but also any kind of vibrant hues I want, right? So it's not only about value and whether it's bright or not bright or whatever the case might be. It's also about that, are the colors more muted? Ooh, well, that wasn't what I expected, but sometimes that happens and you just roll with it. It's also all very wet right now, so it makes it very malleable. There we go. And the other thing I want is a little more, I'm going to put a little more blue in the sky. I'm dropping a little bit of brown into these foreground sections. right? I can see that's in there. Okay. I'm gonna tilt my board a little bit. Gonna grab more of this blue. There we go. So one of the fascinating things about painting every day for, I think I'm at day 62 right now, is you do get to the spot where you just decide, well, I'm going to start experimenting. You've painted all the photos you thought you might have painted. You're getting better at some stuff. You've done a lot of subjects over again. You've painted all the florals. You've painted some cityscapes. You've painted landscapes, and I was like, well, it's right. I got a ways to go still, and you just kind of get outside of your comfort zone, which I actually think is great. I'm not actually grumping about that. I think it's a positive thing. I think it's a way to help yourself expand what you're doing. So this phase here, this is all I'm going to do for this initial phase. It's super smooth and super clean. When I do all my darks on top of this, it's all going to be very granular pigments, very punchy pigments, right, with lots of texture. And so this phase is all supposed to be sort of perfectly smooth. I don't really use phthalo blue normally, but I'm kind of interested to see these two things combine and what I think about it. So I am going to mute my microphone for a moment because I'm going to turn on the blow dryer. So just a second. Here we go.
Stephen, do you mind if we ask questions?
All right, we're back in action. Go ahead. You had a question for me? I do not mind at all if you ask questions.
Yes, I was wondering if the hair dryer, because the paint is so loose in the beginning, so watery, I was wondering if the hair dryer redirects, moves it around.
It doesn't. It doesn't seem to do it. I could see how one would think it might, but it hasn't. It hasn't been a problem for me. It soaks into the paper. It isn't really floating on the surface. So, right. I think if I was using some sort of paper with a harder cuticle, then that might be something that would occur. But right, like it would float on the surface more. But I don't, so it doesn't, I don't have that problem. One of the other things I was going to say is that about painting, you know, every day, and they're small little paintings. They're not that big. They're only 8 by 8. Is I'm definitely very focused on you know, just doing the painting, and it's part of my daily activities currently. And it doesn't take a super duper long time, which right isn't a bad thing. It's nice. I just kind of do the painting, and some days it comes out better. Sometimes I have a little string, right? And I think I'm hot stuff. And then I have another paint, you know, then I'll do something and I can't seem to make a good painting to save my life. But they're all short little paintings, and there's definitely advantages to that. It just helps me do the painting and not fret too much. I don't have too much invested in every little painting. They're all little experiments. It's definitely opened me up to experimenting more. I'm just, right? Every painting is only lasting 30, 45 minutes. So I'm not trying to make the Mona Lisa. I'm just making sure that I paint every day, and I grow a bit every day, and I experiment a bit, and I don't let the desire for success stop me from growing. So the brevity of the whole experience is, you know, logistically, that was the reason that it started that way for me, right? They're small paintings, so of course they all it's been going pretty quick. But actually, it's been the longer I've done it, I've really enjoyed the experience that the brevity has provided. So, I don't think it's the only way to paint, but I definitely think it's been a compelling way to learn, and I think it's had clear advantages. So I think that's my way of singing its praises, and telling other folks that if you are a painter, it's worth doing it. I think if you're learning anything, it's worth doing it, honestly. To try doing something on a daily basis, and to sort of let yourself escape from your desires for perfection, and instead to just allow yourself to experiment and to grow, which is really hard, right? I think we're all adults. At least I think we're all adults here. So I think it's, you know, we're very judgmental of ourselves. So I am slowly editing the photo, and I decided, for example, I wanted the trees to divide up the space. So I wanted them to come up and break the plane of the top of the painting. So that is something that I did on purpose, just to say. And then I'm trying out these different kinds of pigments. They're not pigments I normally use. This phthalo blue is not in my palette. It's too messy, frankly. And these Primatech super granulating pigments are also not in my palette. So I'm allowing myself the opportunity for some experimentation. Now, I'm definitely spending my fair share of time on these trees here because they're really the focal point of this little scene to me. right? They're the strongest contrast. And we have we'll have fence posts and other beautiful things in here to move your eye through the painting. But really, I feel like if these trees up here aren't compelling, then the subject won't work in general. So I'm working on these in here. They're helping me capture a little bit of a light, which is coming from the left-hand side, and it's moving in. Boy, and on the screen, it looks so like the colors are neon, but they're not. So when I'm done with this, I'll be posting stuff on Facebook, and I'll probably post this video on my blog. And so then you can see a color corrected version of the subject that looks more muted the way it actually is. So I'm grabbing some darks and mixing them up on my palette, like ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. This is Perylene green, so it's also very black. And I'm going to use these. I'm painting one wet into wet, right? So, I mean, the background is dry, but this tree that I'm working on is obviously very wet still. And so I'm painting wet into wet, and I need these values to really be punchy. So I'm going for the darks. And this has been something else as an example for me working on this daily painting challenge has been that part of the idea is that you're painting quickly, and some of that's because that's what the challenge was about. But the truth is that it's also because of the simple logistics of trying to paint every day. I think when we don't paint every day, and then you come in to paint, you make time sometimes to paint if you're a painter, and you really want it to be successful, and so you spend a lot of time sometimes on a painting, and which is great. And pardon me, I'm placing this trunk. I'm going to scratch in a little highlight on it. And there are going to be 2 trunks. And so, we're oftentimes, we want it to be really nice. We're not going to paint again for a little while or whatever the case, and you dedicate more time to it because you're not going to be painting again for a little while, say. But when I'm painting every day, I'm like, I got stuff to do. And just the logistics of painting every day push me to be like, I'm trying to carve out time out of my already normal schedule. So sometimes I only got a half an hour. So things go faster. But that actually has its benefits too. It's helped me paint wet into wet. It helps me simplify my shapes, right? Things of that nature. There's definitely a variety of benefits to it. I wouldn't, like I said before, it's not the only way to paint, but it's opened up interesting opportunities, different kinds of things. I'm dropping in a very watery mixture of like burnt sienna and I don't know what it is. But it's warm. And the reason I'm dropping it in here is I want I want to create some texture. So it's going to bleed into the other areas. And it's going to be a warmer, so it'll catch that feeling of sunshine that we're going to put in other parts of this painting also. And okay. And I can already tell a little bell is going off in my head that says, you're futzing with this. So it's time for me I'm going to spit on it, do a little spittle. I know people find it's funny, but it works fantastically. It's going to create little tiny texture. And the background is dry, so that little bit of texture won't affect the sky. It'll just create a little bit of texture on the tree. And I figure if Turner can spit on his paper paintings, then we can all spit on our paintings and do a little bit of spittle. If it works, then it's already hard enough. I don't need to make it harder for myself by not giving myself permission to do something that's functional. I got a little hair on my brush. Okay. So this is going to be a little hill far away. And it goes in here. And I'm going to drop a little bit of warmth in the background, which I kind of like. This area underneath the trees is, I need to get a different brush. I don't want to mix up my colors. Sometimes I have a brush that I have a bunch of green on it, and I'd like to keep that green on it. There we go. So once again, you know, in the photo, this is a clean edge between the trees and the field. It's like a hard edge between them. But I you know, I want to try and finish this painting promptly. And then, so because of that, I'm painting wet into wet. I grab the paint. I have a synthetic, so it's not holding as much moisture. And I daub it off, and then I drop that in. So it's not like exploding on the page, but it bonds the shapes together. So like I said, sometimes these little things that maybe I wouldn't have chosen to do it that way if I wasn't doing this challenge have helped me see some of the really interesting benefits of doing it a certain way. So that's been a very compelling learning experience. So not to be denied. I'm mixing up over here a kind of lavender color, a purpley color. And we're going to drop some of this in one area and a green in the other, and they're opposites, and it should provide some interesting mixtures. So this is going to come in. So I really like in the photo how these shadows move across these hills and they draw your eye down this way. So I really want to make sure that I get that in there. So I didn't do a drawing, right, ahead of time. And that comes from experience. And also, like I said, my aim is brevity for a lot of these short paintings. So what I do, however, is I think a lot about proportion. So for example, when I'm looking at things, I'll say, this shadow on the photograph is about halfway down. So I know that I'm going to connect this tree to this halfway down mark. And I know, you know, the trees go a little bit past halfway. So that's where I painted the trees to. That kind of experience. That's what's really guiding my placement of things when I don't have much in the way, I don't have a drawing at all, right? Is I'm just using, I'm using proportion to guide me. So I have a darker green here, and I'm going to get a little bit of dappled light on this. So I have, using my synthetic, I've daubed it off. I even wipe it on my little rag. And then, so this is pretty dry. So I'm able to get dry brush work in here. There we go. Right? it's kind of a raking light across it. So little bits are catching the sunshine. And I kind of like this lavender hue. And of course, it's a purpley hue here with my brush, but it's going on top of this green. So we're kind of graying things out, and they're mixing a little bit on the paper. There we go. And then what I'm doing is I'm drawing with the brush, basically. Then these are the two edges of a big shadow. Then I'm gonna grab my paint and drop the shadow in. And I could fill in all these little dots, but they're like little bits of magic to me. They're part of what captures the light and makes it really compelling. So I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is grab some of these very granular pigments, and I'm going to create some texture inside of the shadows, so it's not all one value, right? So we have a little bit something going on there inside of the shadows. Sometimes I like to use the side of the brush. You can get really interesting effects where little bristles get caught on the paper and things of that nature, so that you get little brush marks that you couldn't really get if you wanted to make that mark. So I have a little bit of purple on this, and I just love this idea of this kind of purple and green mixing together on the paper itself. So I'm just dropping this little purple in, and I'm letting it have a pronounced kind of color relationship with other stuff that's there. And then I'm going to grab a little bit of this warm mixture from before, and this one that I used back in here. We're gonna drop it in a little bit here and a little bit there to help kind of connect these warm areas together just a little bit. Okay, so in the photo, there's going to be little posts, fence posts disappearing down the slope here. And that's going to go into the painting after I dry this. They're going to be the even darker layer on top of this second layer. But we need to draw, and there's a big dark bank here. So I'm going to mix up a real rich dark and drop it in. So I have this, I think it's zoisite green. So it's very granular. I'm mixing like burnt sienna and ultramarine blue with it. I'm getting a very dark green. Is what I'm putting in here. And once again, I'm going to kind of draw with my pencil, draw with my brush. And for a moment, this is helping me discover the edge of this shape, so that when I fill in, I'm not painting in an area that I wished I had kept, right? And what happens here is, what I like about this painting is that we have different shapes pointing us in different directions. This points us into the middle, and this is clearly pointing us down and through these trees, and it goes this way. This is also pointing downwards. So I'm going to bring this up just a little bit so it points downwards in an obvious way as it descends into the distance. And then over here in the foreground, we're going to have a little area of sunshine, and it points actually up this way. So it's like a Z zigzagging up through the painting. That's kind of one of the things about this subject that I think is interesting. Going to grab some more blue. And these are going to be little highlights for grasses and such. And then this is receding. There we go. That's pretty good. And I'm going to take this really dark color and I'm actually going to drop a little of it back in here. I want to connect this area back in here, which is like the cast shadow from these oaks. There's like a little dip in the land back here. And I want it to feel like a little dip in the land. I'm going to capture some light there. And I think by increasing the darkness of that spot, it'll help us feel the undulation. Okay. And in this foreground, it's going to be warm again. And that's like that can be a little trick that can be helpful sometimes for bringing a foreground closer to you, is to warm it up. So, and I'm not going to do a ton, but I just want to get a little bit of something in here that's got a little warmth to it. I'm going to use the edge of my brush. And, I don't really know how much of these little grassy, shadowy bits I'm going to use, but I'm dropping them in now, and it'll help me create diversity later. The other thing this painting has in the foreground is little mustard flowers. So I'm gonna try and spatter in some yellow in here as things are slowly drying. Little early. I'm gonna scrape in the post shapes as it's drying, and that'll help to create the highlights for some of the posts. I'm just kind of painting with my fingers just to create little bits of texture in there. Okay. And yellow. All right. So I'm grabbing some yellow, and I don't have a clean area on my palette. And I don't really care about that normally, but for yellow, I do think, oops, bumped, that you're going to need a clean yellow. So grabbing a little yellow, little cad lemon, brighten it up. If I do it like this, it'll spatter all over the rest of the painting. So what I got to do instead is I'm coming around the painting here, and I'm spattering over here. So definitely where I point my brush is really important. And this definitely is the sort of thing that takes a ridiculous amount of practice. But there's something I really love about spattering paint. I just feel like I get results and patterns that are natural. And they do things I couldn't do if I was painting it with my brush. And trying to place every flower in the correct spot. Okay. I am looking at how dry or not dry it's not quite dry enough. Yeah. I have to dry this a tiny bit, pardon me. But not too much, because I want to try and scrape out these posts. There you go. I got a crooked post, but them's is the breaks. It's fine. It's part of the charm of the process. And some of these little posts have tiny little wires that are connecting them. And sometimes it can be really appealing to have a really thin, lit up little wire to kind of pull you through a subject. And then sometimes I'll put them with a very thin layer of something dark, and it'll help connect things. So the short of it is I'm going to put a few wires in as well. And not all of them, not too consistent. I just want to give us the idea that the wires are there. And then some of these wires I'll be dropping in later. Okay, I have to dry this, and then we're going to put in little dark shadows. All right. So I am unmuted again. Yes, you guys can hear me again?
Yes.
Okay. I can't see the top of my phone, so never can quite tell. And I'm slowly shrinking my brush size, right? I'm getting to a smaller and smaller brush as I go along. And I have a little bit of this very dark green with some blue, a little bit of burnt sienna, and it's a very thick mixture. I'm using a small synthetic brush so it doesn't hold much water. And I'm also not adding much water to the mixture. So it's very dry is what I'm really getting at. Because for this phase, I'm putting in, little bits of dry brush and smearing it around sometimes with my finger. I don't always want it to be like chunky, hard edges, but I do want it to be dark to help me get some of these values in. And to get it to be dark, it needs to be thick and dry. So I have to be thoughtful if I want to have some of these loose edges remain. I have to go through the process of smearing out some of my edges and things to get the value that I want while still having it not all be hard edged. So I'm gonna go in. The other thing I'll probably do, so I'm using also the side of my brush. Pardon me, I cut myself off there. The side of the brush, because then I can get little bits of texture, right? I'm capturing the edge of, there we go, the edge of the paper. And so the paper texture comes through. It's gonna come in here. The other thing I'm gonna do is that I'm going to drop in some, I'm going to drop in some little washes to help warm certain areas up. And I can get away with that as long as my paint's dry in that area. So mixing up a little bit more, barely any water on the brush. Got this dark green I'm mixing up. I'm going to embellish here. I know that oak trees like to have little sections where they come down low to the ground sometimes. Trail around. And we'll often have multiple trunks as well. You can see here little bits of texture. And I'm going to dry brush in a little bit even darker shadow in here. So I'm using the edge of the brush so that it's not too consistent, right? I don't want it to be like a line. I want it to be something that felt natural and is catching the edges of the grass. And so I'm going to do two little things here. I'm going to wash in a little bit of yellow to warm up these greens. Little yellowy oranginess, actually, a little cad yellow and a little cad orange. I'm making a what is called a yellow orange. And this original wash is too cool. So I want to warm it up a little bit. I'm going to drop in these yellows, and I'll have to blow dry it real quick, and then I can drop in the darks on the posts and such. I want it to be a tiny bit green. There we go. So this definitely is a kind of surgery, but like I said, it's been very liberating. You know, I'm doing these little paintings and I think, well, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And if it does, then I turned a painting that I wasn't super duper happy with into a painting that's much more appealing to my eye. Yeah, that warms it up just a little. And I'm mixing a little bit of orangey red into this, so it's not too zingy of a green. I don't want it to be, I want it to be warmer, and it needs to be green. It's still grass, but it doesn't have to be like super zingy. It just needs to be more yellow. So that's a fine line. You're trying to mix up some kind of yellow, green, and then you're like, but not too pure of a green. So I mix in some orange, and now it's not green at all. There you go. And sometimes these little natural kind of greens that are warm, they actually end up looking a little bit like a brown, which is a really bizarre experience. But then you put them in place and you think, oh, yep, that's a green. So that comes from, for me, that's come from experience. That's a little better. So definitely you can get away with a little bit of this because everything else is dry. And I even want to warm up that little space in the distance, just a little. I remember somebody, I don't remember who it was, said that painting watercolors is sometimes you have to like creep up on the subject. And I do think that's true. sometimes I really nail it on the first go, but you know, that's okay. So it's not always that way. And one of the privileges of working in watercolors is you do get to creep up on it a little bit, which isn't a bad thing to me. Okay, that's better. Sprinkling in a little bit of orange fairy dust to get a little speckles here and there. Okay, I'm going to blow this dry, and then I'm going to put in the posts. I got a little bit of orange speckles on there, but the sky is dry, so it's easy to lift. So the posts are also going to be warm. So I'm hoping it'll bring in this kind of alternate hue into this area up here on the top. All right, I am going to blow dry this very quickly. Test that it's dry, and it is. And grab some burnt sienna and a little bit of orange. And I'm actually going to grab just a little bit of, oh, this is even better. I was going to grab some white, but white is cool. And it's going to cool down the color. And so instead, I grabbed some Naples yellow. And it's relatively opaque and warm. And I think it's going to help me get just a little bit of a warm highlight. Even these got to be darker. For the posts, I have to make a shadow line for the posts. I grab a little bit of ultramarine blue. And create a little directionality, really emphasize the directionality of the light. You know, we're just making a little sketch. So
Hi everyone. A beautiful thing. Oops.
it's okay. It's okay. I don't mind if you guys chat. We're informal here. So thank you very much. Particularly if you're saying wonderful things like that, you're allowed to chop. All right. Let's grab a little bit of that yellow. And what I'm going to do is drop in a little bit of something warm on this post. Still brighter than the shadow, of course, right? And so at this phase, it's all playtime. So what I do want are little bits of, I want to layer some of these shapes, right? Meaning I want to weave them together. And I don't want it to be like just fat blocks everywhere. So at this phase, I mix up a nice, rich, but bright green, meaning it's thick on the palette. If I were to pick the palette up, it wouldn't run. So it's pretty thin. And I can just come in and do little bits of opaque watercolors, right? And this kind of weaving process where you're taking material, you know, we understand that this is a bank of grass in the foreground or some sort of vegetative stuff. So we're partly mixing objects together, but we're also mixing, I mean, on an abstract level, we're mixing shapes together, right? We're mixing we're taking this value here and we're mixing it up into this value here. And it helps us kind of bridge the distance between these shapes. We don't have to get stuck in one part of the painting. So I have a pretty dry brush and the paint is pretty dry. And I think, you know, you can see that it's helping capture some light. And it partly is telling the story, right? The story of almost sunset, late in the day, taking some of that yellow ochre, and I'm also mixing it in, and we're gonna get some sunnier, yellowier, but not too perfectly yellow, right? It's a muted, warm yellow. And we're gonna drop in little bits of highlights. So, you know, this phase of a painting for sure, for me, the way I approach it is borders on the edge. I have too much paint on my brush. Borders on the edge of gouache. But I'm not using gouache. I'm just using watercolors in a thick manner, right? So long ago, when I learned to paint, they were like, hey, well, you should use the full breadth of what the medium has to offer. And if you want to get as dark as you can get as vibrant as I get. Hi, Ingrid. The short answer is yes. So I'll say in a moment. But so, you know, I agree with that mentality. I feel like there is no cheating in art. And I definitely don't think there's any cheating by using my watercolors in an opaque manner. Even if I was going to submit this to a watercolor show or something, it's all watercolors here. I'm not doing anything that's not watercolors. So, I mean, just to sort of go on about that for a moment. Yep, you're welcome. What I'm going to do, Ingrid, is I'll eventually be posting it to the blog. I'll make a little post and share some of these. The Zoom demos that I'm doing are I can record them. So this one I can record. Later on this week, I'll be doing some more demos. I'll be doing a demo on Facebook, a live demo on actually it's on Instagram and such. Those demos, they're like little, you know, transient butterflies. So I don't have any control to record those. They go on Instagram. So if you're on Instagram or Facebook, you can go and see them there after I'm done. But I can't share them on the blog or something to that effect. So I really like this phase of the process. You have a little control over what you're doing, and I don't want to go too far, but I do like a bit of control, just because I can shape the color scheme, right? And I can weave these shapes together. Let me easily navigate between these bands in the foreground and these other bands that are farther back. And then in the foreground, I do want to get a few shadows to help me get like one dark, one light, one dark, one light, one dark, one light, one dark. And it actually is like that, right? It's tracking uphill in little bands. And I want to just hint at that here in the foreground to give one more layer of depth. And I would say this little sketch is done. I've been on for about an hour, and I didn't start exactly at 10, but it's an hour basically for this little painting. Some of them go pretty quick. This one, I definitely was noodling around and having a fun time. Demos do tend to get me chatting, which gets me painting for longer. I was going to sign off here in a minute, but before I went, I didn't know if anybody had any questions they wanted to ask me or say anything, this is your opportunity. For these Zoom demos, we get to interact. When I do the Instagram and Facebook demos, it's you guys can ask questions by text, but I can't hear you.
That was
All-
great. That was great, Stephen.
Thank you very much. It's
Very,
fun
very-
doing these little paintings. It's well worth the effort.
Yes.
Yeah, something to learn. I'm definitely learning by doing it. There's no doubt.
I like the
Yeah.
idea of using that thick paint at the end rather than sometimes you use a wash to just, glaze over the whole thing. But this way you have more control and
Yeah,
it brings out highlights. Like you said, I like that. Thank you.
yeah, no problem. My pleasure. All right. Well, it's Saturday, folks. I'm gonna go do some gardening, and it has been such a pleasure hanging out with you guys. And thank you for coming and watching me paint and participating. Thanks, Sharon. Thank you,
Thank
Ingrid.
you. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
All you as well, you guys.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
It's beautiful.
No wonder I do these demos. It's so personal. Connect with us. All right. Have a good day. I'll talk to
All
you
right.
later.
Thanks,
See you
Stephen.
later. Bye-bye.